Hi everyone, this is Brian with Obedia, and my friends at Lexicon Pro have asked me to take a look at some of the plugins in their PCM native Reverb plugin bundle, which is available for both Mac and PC in VST, RTAS, and audio unit formats. So you should be able to make use of these plugins in just about any digital audio workstation that you may be working with at home or in your studio. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Vintage Plate Reverb plugin, which is part of this bundle. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of it, play some audio through it to just show you how you can make use of this plugin to bring in some color and character to your mix. So let's dive right in, take a look at the interface, and start talking about the plugin. The Vintage Plate plugin makes use of a number of different algorithms to give a vintage sound to the plugin. It has characteristics of older plate implementations and different equalization, which allows it to again emulate a very vintage plate reverb sound. So in essence, it speaks differently with different input diffusion, and it also has an additional pair of echo voices to give it that vintage sound. Now, a plate reverb is a large, thin sheet of metal suspended upright under tension on springs. Transducers are attached to that plate. They transmit a signal that makes that plate vibrate, which causes sounds to appear to be occurring in large open spaces. This is what we usually associate with reverb, especially in a lot of pop music, rock music, and so on. So this is a more common sound that we are used to hearing in most applications for reverb in music. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about the interface, then we'll play some audio examples for you. On the top left-hand side of the Vintage Plate plugin, we have the algorithm listed, which we're making use of. We will also see this listed in the center console. This is also our real-time display. If we click on the real-time display, we have the choice between multiband, frequency, and impulse settings, and we'll show those in action in just a few moments. Near the top of the plugin, we have the category pull-down menu. This allows us to choose from instrument plates, vocal plates, live sound, and drums and percussion. And we'll show you a little bit of implementation of each of those on some different instrumentation in a moment. Depending on the category which we choose, our preset pull-down will change to match that category, allowing us to see a number of different presets all available to us designed by Lexicon, which will let us really dial in exactly the sound that we would like to get out of the Vintage Plate plugin. On the right-hand side of the plugin, we have our EQ. The pull-down menu right here will allow us to choose the type of EQ which we would like to apply to the plugin. And each of these parameters just below the graphical interface will allow us to dial in exactly the type of EQ that we would like. You'll also notice the early and late buttons here. These buttons select which EQ section is currently being edited. Early will include reflections, direct echo outputs, and room patterns, and late will include the reverb tail. So this allows us to dial in directly the type of equalization which we would like to make use of in the plugin. On the left-hand side, we have our input and output meters, allowing us to keep an eye on the incoming outgoing signal coming in and out of the plugin. In the center, again, we have our real-time display. Clicking on this with our mouse will allow us to switch between multiband, frequency, and impulse settings for the real-time display, allowing us to mix, in essence, with our eyes, also making use of our ears, which, of course, will be our final judging factor in our sound, but it is nice to have a graphical representation of our audio as well. In the bottom half of the plugin, we have our 9 faders. These 9 faders give us quick access to a number of features and parameters inside of the plugin. These are also customizable, and we will talk about how you can do that in just a few moments. But I know that right now you guys would love to hear what this plugin sounds like. So first, let's start by bypassing it, and I'm going to play some recorded vocal here first off, because I'm going to make use of the category vocal plates. So I'm going to play some vocal recording, and then we're going to select a different vocal plate and add some sound to that. Here we go.
You got the world laid upon your shoulder.
All right, so there's our vocal. It's recorded dry, not a whole lot of coloring going on in the signal right here, which is great because it gives us a nice dry signal to be able to start adding our vintage plate to. So let's make use of a vocal plate. We're just going to start with the preset vocal plate, and I'm going to immediately change my mix a little bit right here by just dragging my fader and start playback and see what this sounds like.
You got the world laid upon your shoulder.
Nice vocal plate going on right there, not too much tail, very quick and easy to add some nice space to our vocal. Let's try out another vocal plate preset.
You got the world laid upon your shoulder.
Definitely a bigger space going on right there, and you can see as we change each of these different vocal presets, we can start to really change the character of our sound.
You got the world laid upon your shoulder.
And you notice I'm just making quick changes to the mix inside of the Vintage Plate plugin by simply grabbing these faders on the bottom half of the plugin. And this is great because this gives me quick and easy access to these parameters inside the plugin to really dial my sound in exactly as I would like it. Now we're going to try out the instrument plates category and apply this to an instrument. I'm going to play some piano. I'll play this piano for you dry, and then we'll play it with the Vintage Plate plugin active. Nice piano recording there, but again, not a whole lot of space going on in the recording, so let's start to add some space by making use of some of the instrument plates in the Vintage Plate plugin. Let's go ahead and add a little bit to this mix immediately here. The tail has a great character to it, and you also notice that it has a bit of a darker sound to its overall characteristics, which allow it to, again, really match that vintage sound that we're looking to get from the Vintage Plate plugin. Okay, now we're going to make use of the live sound category and try out some of the live plates. Again, we're going to use some piano. I'll play that piano for you dry. Again, not too much coloration going on in the signal here. Let's go ahead and unbypass the plugin. Now we're going to introduce the Vintage Plate plugin to our mix, and I'll go ahead and switch between some presets. So you can really hear a number of different characteristics of the Vintage Plate plugin as I switch between these various presets. Really great for being able to add to just about any type of instrumentation. Finally, let's dive in and make use of the drums and percussion category. This is one I'm very fond of, being a drummer myself. And let's try out some different presets here. I have some drums which I've recorded. I'll play those back for you to start off with. So again, this is just a very simple overhead mic recording of a drum kit. Not a whole lot of coloration going on in the signal here. Let's go ahead and start adding a little bit of character to it by making use of the Vintage Plate plugin. I'll just hit play and then switch through some presets for you. So again, this is a great category for drums. If you're mixing drums, you're really going to be able to dial in a number of different sounds for your drums, from anywhere having to do with the very large to the very quick and tight sound that you would usually find that you might not be able to get without a very large studio with a large amount of soundproofing. So this is an awesome way to be able to dial your mix in very specifically without having access to all of that big gear. So there's a number of sound examples for you. Let's go ahead and talk about the fader row on the bottom half of this plugin, because I've obviously been making a lot of use of it. I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys about why it is so very useful. The 9 faders on the bottom of the Vintage Plate plugin and on the bottom of all of the plugins in the PCM Native Reverb plugin bundle is very useful because it allows us to gain access quickly and easily to parameters which we would usually need to dive around a plugin and go into many different sliders and pages and things like that in order to get access to these features. But using the 9 faders on the bottom of the Vintage Plate plugin, we have quick access to these various parameters, allowing us to mix very quickly. Now, the reason that this works so well is because if we click on the edit button, we now have access to the soft row. These 9 faders are part of the soft row. They are customizable to exactly your own specifications. You can do this by taking a look at the top section of our fader, where we have a label for that fader, but just below it, we have some yellow text. And if we click on that text, you're going to notice that we get a pop-out menu. This pop-out menu is going to list all of the different features and parameters which we can take control of inside of the plugin. And by simply clicking on one of those, we have now hard-coded that option to this fader, allowing ourselves quick and easy access to being able to take control of just about any of the features which are available to us inside of the plugin. Now, when we made one of these changes, we can click on the compare button, and this will allow us to switch back and forth and compare our changes and see if we like them. We can also store a preset by simply clicking on the store button, which will allow us to quickly and easily store our user presets for later use in these plugins and in other digital audio workstations. Now, in addition to the soft row, we also have access to a number of different tabs down on the bottom of the plugin here. The first one being the input and mix. Input and mix is pretty straightforward, going to allow us to change the overall input and mix settings for the plugin. Here we have access to mix, pre-delay, diffusion, shape, and spread settings, all accessible through these various faders. We have the reverb tab up next, allowing us to take in-depth control over the reverb controls inside of this plugin. You'll also notice that some of these sections will have a clickable option just below the fader label, which will allow us to make changes to these sections depending on what parameter they control. In the case of reverb time here, I can click to enable infinite on or infinite off for my reverb time. I also have the ability to click underneath the high cut settings here inside of the reverb section and change the damping type which I would like to make use of. Of course, I can grab a hold of each of these faders and make changes to the overall sound of the plugin. Next up, I have the Reflections tab. Reflections going to allow me to control more in depth the reflections and the reflection sound inside of this plugin, really dial in exactly the type of reflections which I would like access to. And again, you're going to notice these clickable options below each of these labels. In this case, I can change between absolute and tempo settings. And for my gain setting, I can change between normal and inverted settings. Now again, as we said earlier, inside of the Vintage Plate plugin, we do have access to an additional pair of echo voices. So this is where we have the option to actually tune each of these echo voices inside of the Vintage Plate plugin, allowing us to be very selective about the type of sound that we would like to get from each of these echo voices, and really letting us dial in that Vintage Plate sound, which we normally would not be able to get without having to make use of much older analog gear on average. All of these different parameters in the fader section of the Vintage Plate plugin allow us to really dial in our sound exactly as we would like it to be in our mix, and of course culminating in the soft row, which allows us to customize very specifically the type of sound which we would like to come out of our Vintage Plate plugin. In summary, the Vintage Plate plugin by Lexicon has characteristics of older plate implementations, and again, an additional pair of echo voices to allow you to get that more classic plate reverb sound, which usually you would need to rely on a large amount of analog gear in order to get in your studio. Taking a look again at the interface, we have our algorithm type listed on the top left-hand corner. We have our category pull down, and of course our presets pull down. Both are going to change from plugin to plugin. And our presets are going to change based on the category option which we choose. We have our EQ on the right-hand side of the plugin, allowing us to equalize exactly the type of sound which we would like to get out of the Vintage Plate plugin. On the left-hand side, we have our input and output meters, and of course in the center we have our real-time display, allowing us to choose between multiband, frequency, and impulse settings in our real-time display. Finally, in the bottom half of the plugin, we have our fader section with our 9 faders, the soft row allowing us to choose from the options just below the fader labels and really dial in exactly the parameters which we most often need access to in our plugin. And then we have access to the many other features of the plugin by clicking on these different tabs, all of course culminating in being able to compare and store our presets by making use of the compare and store features in the plugin. And there you have it, everyone. I hope that this overview has been useful to you. Please check out our other videos to find out more about the great plugins in the PCM native reverb plugin bundle by Lexicon Pro. I hope that now you're able to start adding some great reverbs to your productions immediately. Thank you so much for watching, and happy music making to you. Take care.